Hi world, it's Sunday the 19th of September 2021. It's about 20 minutes past 2 in the afternoon UK time. I was just sitting down literally 10 minutes ago getting ready to email everyone for the beginner's course in astrology that starts this Thursday, confirming everyone who's paid and getting everyone ready for what there's still a few spaces left, so if you want to get in, just drop me a line at steve@stevejug.co. But I was just sitting down getting ready to do all the emails, getting ready for an afternoon of sorting it all out, and something came up just as I heard something on the news about a correlation between current situations and as they were 103 years ago. And it kind of got me thinking. So I just did a little bit of research. So this is going to be uncomfortable hearing for a few of you. And it's purely based on my conjecture and my astrological knowledge, plus history that I've researched both recently today and over many, many years. So let's take you back in time to 1918 and 1919, post First World War, at the end of the First World War. There was a big Saturn opposite Uranus in the sky over those period of time, and it was the time of the Spanish flu. The reason it was called the Spanish flu is because although it was a global pandemic, the American, French, Russian, British newspapers suppressed all reports of it for fear of damaging morale. But the Spanish press didn't, and one of the first casualties was the King of Spain. So that's why it got called the Spanish flu, even though it was a pandemic. And that was Saturn opposite Uranus, 2018-2019. Not 1918, 1919, my apologies. In 1929, 1930, it was the time of Pluto's discovery, but it was also the time of the Great Depression, the stock market crash. In 1930, Saturn was square Uranus, and there was a global epidemic of something called psittacosis, Psitta-cosis. Fast forward 35, 40 years. In 1966, there's a subgeneration of people born with Saturn opposite Uranus and Pluto. Move on 2 years, in 1968, there's a time when Saturn is making an inconjunction to Uranus and to Neptune and to Pluto. There's a big finger of fate in the sky that lasts a good few months, and this is the time of the Hong Kong flu pandemic. In 1983 and 1984, Saturn and Pluto were conjunct, first of all at 29 degrees of Libra, and then later on again at 0 degrees of Scorpio. Saturn and Pluto, and if I remember correctly, Mars as well, all moved into Scorpio from Libra within the space of a week or two of each other. And of course it was at this time that HIV and AIDS, which had been diagnosed first of all a couple of years before, suddenly became a lot more prominent worldwide, and that became a pandemic that is still ongoing. So let's get away from the pandemic issues just a little bit. Fast forward a bit. 1988, Saturn was conjunct Uranus again. And this was at 29 degrees, the very end of Sagittarius. At the end of 1988, it was seen as a potential breakthrough for free speech. Didn't quite happen that way. In 1989, Saturn was conjunct Neptune in Capricorn. So we've got Saturn conjunct Uranus in 88, Saturn conjunct Neptune in 89. Now, this was the downfall of communism. It was the downfall of the Berlin Walls when all the Eastern European communist countries opened their borders. And it was the start of the breakdown of the communist states and the emergence of the current regimes which have a different ethos, shall we say. 1993, Uranus was conjunct Neptune. Now, I suggest with Uranus conjunct Neptune in Capricorn, we're seeing a revolution of the imagination in terms of global structures. And this was really, although the internet was birthed around the 88, 89, that's when the first algorithms were written, it began to emerge. The new technology began to emerge properly into the world around the early mid 1990s, around the time of the Uranus-Neptune conjunction. 2001, we had the Saturn-Pluto opposition, which was characterized by the events of New York 20 years ago. 2009 and 2010, we had Saturn square Pluto, just at the time of the swine flu epidemic stroke pandemic. 2020, although it really started around November 2019 as far as we know, but for 2020, 2021 and forward into 2022, we have COVID. Started under a Saturn conjunct Pluto, which last happened in 83, 84 at the start of Scorpio with HIV. All of these, or many of these, take out the technological ones, all the other big conjunctions and oppositions and some squares from Saturn coincide with timings of global epidemics or global pandemics. Now, there are plenty, well, not a lot, there are some other times over the last 100 years where Saturn has been conjunct, opposite or square Uranus, Neptune or Pluto, and there has been no global pandemic or epidemic. So this is not to say that the configurations of Saturn with the outer planets represent times of global epidemic or pandemic, but more than 50% of them do. Much more than 65% of them do. Now, doing this research and talking to a couple of other people, it's got me tempted to sort of, to those students who I'm working with regularly, who have been on my course already, I'm thinking of doing a sort of advanced workshop on this. So if there's enough interest, you know how to get hold of me if you're one of my existing students, and I might actually do a workshop on this, because it's not just about the lead up from the last 100 years, it's also about what's coming up in the future. Because if we follow this pattern through, then the immediate and the medium short term don't look that good. Let's just deal with recent years. Saturn conjunct Pluto in January, February, March 2020, at the same time as Jupiter was there as well, creating this sudden burst of expansive development of COVID around the planet. Saturn then remained conjuncting Pluto through to November of 2020, at which point Saturn moved forward and started squaring Uranus, which it still is, as it was in 1930 when there was a global endemic of psittacosis, and there's been square Uranus a couple of times since. Now, from my astrological perspective, with Saturn continuing to square Uranus on and off through to almost this time next year, it suggests to me that COVID is not going to go away. It's going to slowly, gradually weaken over the next year or so until it becomes commonplace as flu. Now, this is conjecture on my part. It is not a prediction or a forecast. It is conjecture based on looking at these patterns from the past. But let's fast forward a little bit. In mid-late 2025, Neptune transits from Pisces into Aries, as does Saturn. And over the second half of 2025, Saturn and Neptune are going to be little more than 1 degree away for the whole of the second half of 2025. They will not conjunct, but they will be very, very close at the very start of Aries and then again at the very end of Pisces. Both Saturn and Neptune will move into Aries in 2025. Both of them will stand still and retrograde back into Pisces before moving forward again into Aries in early 2026. Neptune will move into Aries a couple of weeks before Saturn in February 2026. There will only be one true conjunction of Saturn conjunct Neptune, and this will be at 0 degrees of Aries and in the early part of 0 degrees of Aries at the very, very start of the zodiac. But they will be within a degree of each other and conjunct each other basically for 6 months beforehand at the very last degree of the zodiac in 29 Pisces, although the exactness is 0 degrees Aries. Now, Saturn conjunct Neptune happens on average every 35 years, 34 to 36 years. There's a regular cycle here. There is a well-documented astrological study of this that shows that Saturn conjunct Neptune is related to upturns and downturns in left-wing governments around the world. Saturn was either conjunct or opposite Neptune at the Russian Revolution, the rise of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of communism. It's a well-known astrological theme. With Saturn conjunct Neptune in the one that's coming up in 25-26, it's much more significant because it's happening in the very last degree of the zodiac and then the very first degree of the zodiac. Because it's happening at first in water, Saturn conjunct Neptune, which rules Pisces, in water sign, suggests to me that environmental situations are only going to get more intense as we get towards this time. And then the actual conjunction in February 26 at 0 degrees of Aries, a fire sign, it tells me that we're going to see increased climate chaos with lots more fires and lots more hurricanes and typhoons and deluges. It also suggests that if these patterns of the last 100 years, which aren't consistent but are more than 60% reliably active, if that were to be followed, then we're heading into another wave of epidemic or pandemic around 2025-2026. However, I prefer to stay on the positive side. And I note that astrologically, post 2025-2026, by this time, Saturn and Neptune would have moved into Aries. Uranus will be on the point, if it hasn't moved already, of moving into Gemini. Pluto would have moved into Aquarius. We would have moved from female into male in a way that's going to happen in a very brief period of time, over a course of a year or two, which just hasn't happened before. And it points to a whole fresh start. So it seems to me that those of us who get through this transition, this kind of forced upgrade of consciousness, those of us who get through this in one piece are going to move into a whole new period. And it's loosely called the Age of Aquarius. I don't want to get too cosmic, let alone burst in a song. But I have every hope for those of us who get through to 2026 onwards, some middle of 2026 onwards, are going to find ourselves living in a more, not utopian society, but in a society that's going to come to its senses and stop being so dominated by the fear that's perpetuated by a blend of media and big pharma. Now, I don't want to get too much into conspiracy theories or ranting around this type of stuff because I'll get taken down by YouTube if I do. And quite right too, because I don't want to breed fear or conspiracy stuff. However, look on the footnotes of this video and you will see a link to NWA, and it is not the band NWA, it is nutritionists with attitude, and you'll either love it or you'll hate it. I remain optimistic and hopeful for the future, and by the time we get to 2026, 2027, I'll be in my very early 70s, and I honestly hope and am dreaming in a long-term positive future for all of us from that time. In the meantime, I cannot say too much on this because I don't want to cause any more controversy. But as I said recently in a video on the difference between intuition and instinct, we live in an animal body. We were born with most of us were born with a perfect body. Trust your instincts. Trust your body. I trust my digestion. I trust my immune system. And I will continue to do so. And one day I will die. And I don't know how I will die or when, although I've got an idea because I've studied astrology more than 40 years. In the meantime, the planets impel, they don't compel. So I'm just going to have as much damn fun with the rest of my life as I possibly can. And to those students of mine who are starting this beginner's course this Thursday, as well as the ones who are coming back from the last courses for a second hit, catch you on Thursday. And for the rest of you, I've got another video to do in a couple of days' time on a scandal that is going to rock the world from an astrological perspective. Catch you later, world. Bye.